It was a Sunday morning in paradise, December 7th, 1941. The sun rose over the island of Oahu, casting golden light across the waters of Pearl Harbor. The air was still, the sky clear, the world was quiet. American sailors went about their routines, some still sleeping, some getting ready for church, and others laughing over breakfast. It was just another morning. But in less than an hour, it would become one of the most infamous days in history. For years, the world had been drifting towards chaos. Japan, hungry for resources and empire, had carved a brutal path through Asia, seizing Manchuria, invading China, and laying claim to vast territories across the Pacific. The United States watched with growing unease, but not with action. Still healing from the Great Depression and haunted by the bloodshed of World War I, Americans were in no hurry to get dragged into another war. President Roosevelt walked a careful line, condemning Japan's aggression while stopping short of direct conflict. But behind the scenes, tensions were rising fast. In 1940, the US cut off Japan's access to scrap metal, and in 1941 stopped the flow of oil. Now, that single move alone strangled Japan's war machine, cutting off nearly all the fuel it needed to power its ships, planes, and tanks. And to Tokyo's military leaders, it was an act of economic warfare. They saw only two options: either back down or strike first. And they weren't going to back down. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the brilliant architect of Japan's naval strategy, understood well the danger of war with the United States. He had studied at Harvard. He'd lived in America. He knew the scale of its industry and the will of its people, and he knew that once America was roused, it would not stop. But he also knew that Japan's only real chance of survival was to hit first and hit hard. So he proposed something unthinkable: a surprise attack on the US Pacific Fleet right in its home port, Pearl Harbor. A single devastating blow to cripple American naval power before it could even respond. In late November of 1941, 6 Japanese aircraft carriers slipped quietly out of port under the cover of darkness. They carried over 350 aircraft and thousands of men, a floating fist aimed squarely at Hawaii. They traveled in total radio silence, avoiding shipping lanes, concealed by the vast emptiness of the Pacific. Not a single word was transmitted, not a single alarm was raised. They'd be well within range in just a matter of days, and still, America had no idea. It was just before dawn on December 7th. The Japanese strike force had made it. 230 miles north of Oahu, they were close enough to strike, but still far enough to remain invisible. On the decks of 6 Japanese aircraft carriers, final checks were done in silence. Engines were warmed, bombs were armed. Pilots tied on headbands, many with the rising sun stitched above their brows. Some carried personal letters, others said quiet prayers. And at 6 a.m., the first wave launched. 183 aircraft, torpedo bombers, dive bombers, fighters, high-altitude bombers, all climbing into the soft Hawaiian morning. At the same time, the American destroyer the USS Ward spotted something unusual just outside the harbor. It was the periscope of a Japanese midget submarine. It opened fire and sunk it. It was the first shots of the Pacific War fired by the US Navy. But the warning wasn't taken seriously. Command assumed it was just a false alarm. Elsewhere, a young radar operator picked up a large formation of planes on approach, but it was dismissed as a flight of B-17s that were expected from the mainland. No one knew the sky was about to fall. Commander Mitsuo Fushida, who was leading the first wave, looked down through a break in the clouds at about 7:40 a.m. Pearl Harbor lay beneath him, calm and unaware. Battleship Row was lined with his targets: the Arizona, Oklahoma, West Virginia, California, Nevada, Tennessee, Maryland, and Pennsylvania. He reached for his radio and barked the signal: Tora, 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 the code for total surprise. And at 7:48 a.m., the first bombs fell. Dive bombers came in at steep angles with their engines howling. Torpedo planes skimmed across the harbour, releasing their payloads with deadly precision. Explosions tore through steel hulls and water alike, and smoke rose like curtains on hell. The USS Arizona was hit by a 1,700-pound bomb that pierced the deck and detonated her forward magazine. The ship exploded with such force, it lifted up out of the water and broke in half, and more than 1,100 men died in a matter of seconds. The Oklahoma was torn open by torpedoes and rolled over, trapping hundreds inside, and the West Virginia was hit by at least 7 torpedoes. The Nevada tried to make a break for open water and was the only battleship to do so, but it was hit repeatedly and eventually beached to avoid sinking in the channel. Japanese fighters swept the airfields. Parked American planes lined up wing to prevent sabotage became perfect targets. Hangars burned, explosions echoed. Pilots were killed before they could even get up off the ground. But still, some fought back. Lieutenants George Welch and Kenneth Taylor, 2 young fighter pilots recovering from a late-night dance, jumped into their P-40s and took off under fire. They managed to shoot down multiple enemy planes, one of the only successful American airborne responses of the morning. Below deck, men scrambled in darkness trying to escape the rising water. On deck, anti-aircraft gunners opened fire, often without orders, sometimes without training. Nurses and doctors at base hospitals would work without rest as the wounded poured in, burned, bloodied, and shell-shocked. And in the thick of it all, a cook named Doris Miller would carry his wounded captain to safety before picking up a machine gun, a weapon he wasn't even trained to use, and returning fire at the Japanese planes overhead. At 8:40 a.m., the second wave arrived, another 167 aircraft. More bombs, more bullets, more blood. They hit whatever targets were still standing: dry docks, cruisers, destroyers, repair yards. And then, as quickly as they'd come, they were gone. By 10 a.m., the sky was silent. The harbour, however, was anything but. The attack lasted less than 2 hours, but it left devastation that would last generations. 2,403 Americans were killed. Over 1,000 more were wounded. 8 battleships had been hit. The Arizona and Oklahoma were total losses, and more than 180 American aircraft were destroyed. The Japanese lost just 29 planes, and all 6 of their carriers were untouched. The cost to America was unimaginable, and yet the worst mistake Japan made that day wasn't the destruction it caused, but the fury it awakened. Across the Pacific, word of the attack hit the mainland like a thunderclap. At first, people didn't believe it. A surprise Japanese air raid on US soil in Hawaii? It sounded impossible. But as the reports rolled in, the sinking of battleships, the loss of life, the destruction, the mood across America changed. Confusion gave way to disbelief, and disbelief quickly turned to rage. On the morning of December 8th, President Roosevelt stood before a joint session of Congress. His face was grim, his voice unwavering. He called December 7th a date which would live in infamy. He spoke for just over 6 minutes. It was all he needed. The speech echoed across radios in living rooms, factories, schoolyards, and deep into the heart of millions. Congress didn't hesitate. The vote for war passed almost unanimously. The United States of America was now at war with the Empire of Japan. Within days, young men lined up at recruitment centers across the country. Some were angry, some were scared, most were determined. The country mobilized almost overnight. Auto plants retooled into tank factories, canneries became ammunition lines. Steel, oil, labor, sacrifice, all thrown into the furnace of war. And in towns and cities across the nation, a new phrase rang out: "Remember Pearl Harbor." In Japan, the attack was celebrated as a masterstroke, but not everyone joined the cheers. Admiral Yamamoto, the man who had planned the strike, wasn't smiling. He reportedly told his staff, "I fear all we have done is to awaken the sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Now, Whether he actually said those exact words or not, the sentiment was real. He knew this war wouldn't be short, and he knew it wouldn't be easy. In the weeks that followed Pearl Harbor, Japan struck everywhere. Wake Island, the Philippines, Malaya, Hong Kong, the Dutch East Indies. British and American forces, unprepared and overstretched, fell back in defeat after defeat, and it looked for a moment like Japan's gamble had paid off. But the US still had one thing Japan had not destroyed: its aircraft carriers. The Enterprise, the Lexington, and the Yorktown were all out to sea on December 7th, which meant they were all untouched, and now they were all on the hunt. 6 months later, the tide would turn. At a tiny speck of land called Midway, American codebreakers intercepted Japan's next move. The US Navy set a trap, and it worked. In June 1942, 4 of Japan's elite carriers, including Akagi and Kaga, veterans of Pearl Harbor, were sunk in a single day. It was a catastrophic blow, and from that moment on, Japan was on the defensive. Pearl Harbor didn't break the United States, it galvanized it. In just a few years, American industry became a war machine the likes of which the world had never seen. Island by island, the US clawed its way back across the Pacific. From Guadalcanal to Iwo Jima to Okinawa, all roads led toward Japan. And in August of 1945, the war that began at Pearl Harbor ended with 2 atomic bombs. One dropped on Hiroshima and the other on Nagasaki. Japan surrendered. The empire that had once stretched from Burma to the beaches of Hawaii collapsed. The very ships Japan had tried to destroy were now anchored in Tokyo Bay. The surrender was signed on the deck of the Missouri as the ghosts of Pearl Harbor looked on. But history, as it often does, didn't end in bitterness. In the years that followed, the 2 enemies forged an unlikely partnership. The United States helped rebuild Japan, not just its cities, but its future. A new constitution, a new democracy, and eventually, an ally. Today, Japan and the United States stand side by side. Trading partners, strategic allies, friends. Proof that even the deepest wounds can heal. But Pearl Harbor is never forgotten. The wreckage has been cleared, the Pacific Fleet rebuilt stronger than ever, but the USS Arizona still lies at the bottom, a tomb for 1,177 sailors. And to this day, oil still rises from her hull, a slow black weeping from a wound that never fully closed. It remains a sacred ground, not just for what was lost, but for what was changed. Before December 7th, 1941, the United States was a reluctant observer. After it, it became a superpower, engaged, determined, unstoppable. And all because of a quiet Sunday morning in the Pacific. For more epic tales from the War Stories archive, hit that subscribe button to enlist today. Then, pick one of the stories on screen to select your next mission. Over and out, soldier.